Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Azafrani. I am an AI ethicist. I'm the co-chair of the IEEE research group on autonomy and weapons systems. I'm a senior program manager in the Office of Responsible AI, and I'm also a consultant to the U.S. Army Science Board on AI and national security issues. And I'm here to give you a brief overview of AI governance, why it's important, why it's increasingly relevant to organizations of all shapes and sizes, and really what it means in this new era of AI that we have. If you could go to the next slide, please. So first I'll be talking about AI governance, and then I'll be talking about some approaches to AI governance that are quite different and that could be applied to many different contexts in your organizations. So AI governance, is it really important, to companies of all industries and sizes? And the answer is executives increasingly think so. And there was a study that Capgemini had first begun to release in 2019 that started to survey CEOs of companies, asking them whether ethical issues in AI applications was something that they encountered in their business. And you can start to see that across the world, this is not an isolated problem, that executives kind of agreed that AI ethics was an issue that they were facing as far as risk management in a number of different dimensions. We're not just talking about developing AI, but we're also talking about using AI here. So you can notice that increasingly we have executives who are concerned about this issue and countries that are concerned about this issue. We also saw a vast publication of AI ethics strategies at the national level, and we now have a collection of over 100 of those. The OECD monitors them. And all in all, it seems like the world is progressing and moving toward a framework of AI governance, but what does that actually mean when we apply it, to our everyday work and with our teams? So what is governance to begin with? There are two contexts that we speak of when we talk about governance. One is a business context. In general, when we talk about governance in a business setting, we mean that we are meeting the needs of our stakeholders, whether that's our shareholders, whether that's our executives, whether that's our coworkers, that we are ensuring that an organization is running smoothly and in compliance enough to function. And so this means we have to balance different objectives to achieve goals as an organization. So that's sort of on a very broad level what governance means. In a public policy setting, when we talk about governance, we talk about laws, we talk about regulation, norms, and standards that are actually clarifying and informing how businesses go about their objectives. And so when we apply this to AI, what this means is acceptable and appropriate uses of AI and a way that a business can effectively monitor that that's taking place over time. And I think it's really important that we realize that AI governance is a relatively new field. There is a vast complexity underpinning the issues that we're talking about here that have been treated in many other areas of compliance in general, such as privacy, such as security. And so we need to kind of take a holistic view of what has already been done, because as we will go through this presentation, we can actually see that a lot of the things that we've learned and mistakes that we've made over time are highly relevant to AI governance and ensuring that it's developed and used in a way that benefits both our organizations and also more broadly the people that we are producing technology for. Next slide, please. And so why does AI need governance in the first place? So this slide has a few tiles that kind of explains that'll appear as you kind of click through them. Perfect, that's it. So why AI needs governance in the first place? When we are looking at issues of software and issues of AI and how fundamentally, what is the pivot that has been made that makes AI so unique to need its own governance structure? I think what I think of is this question that for the first time in human history, we have a decision maker about human life, about resources that is actually not human? And how and under what framework are those decisions governed? That to me is why AI needs governance. This slide illustrates a whole set of sort of the paradigmatic ethical issues that we have in AI. We have autonomy, which I think speaks to what I was just saying, is that we have a decision maker that is, not a human. And so how are those decisions being made and imbued in technology? We've got privacy issues that are increasingly important, because now we're not just talking about personally identifiable information, we're talking about systems that are able to correlate very disparate pieces of information and triangulate that to a person. So we have different issues in privacy because of AI. We have explainability issues, human AI interaction, making sure that, because we have an interface now between humans and computers that we haven't before, making sure that that is something that the humans and computers are both kind of optimizing each other's abilities. We have longer term societal issues such as job loss and de-skilling. And we have broader issues of, once we start to get AI to a level, which we already have in many skill sets, past the point where humans can perform, how do we want to think about how those technologies are governed and where they apply? Because they could have pretty broad-reaching implications for society. So all in all, these are the set of issues that make AI unique to other software issues. So now that we've kind of gotten a grasp on the issues of AI governance, I'm going to go through some frameworks that are publicly available that demonstrate how AI governance can be achieved even when an organization, whether or not an organization is actually developing an AI technology, or whether it's applying it, whether it's applied in a recruitment function, actually at the application level for the product that you're building. AI governance actually applies to this whole range of AI lifecycle issues. So I'll go ahead and start to introduce some of the most popular frameworks that we have right now. So in order to apply some of these governance frameworks, you actually have to do a little bit of an intake with your organization and understand, okay, where is AI actually coming into play, and is AI coming into play at all in a way that's actually bringing in some of these ethical issues or risk. And one lesson that we can draw here is from cybersecurity, in that when we're thinking about, and essentially indexing all of the areas where AI comes into play and thinking, how does that pose a risk to my business? What is the likelihood that that risk is actually going to come into being? That can help us prioritize, because this is such a new field, because resources are so scarce, expertise is so scarce, we really need a way to triage, and that's very important. So what's relevant for Microsoft is not going to be necessarily relevant to any other organization, even though Microsoft has shared, a bunch of public materials about how we do this for the sake of transparency, but they're not necessarily going to be able to be picked up off the shelf and just used by any other business. When we think about AI risk, I think there are a couple of dimensions and ways to start to go about how to even create that index in the first place. And it's not just to do with the technology itself. That's very important. You need to understand where risk enters into the program. Is it because people aren't sure how to use the system? So then we're talking about a transparency issue, not necessarily an engineering issue. Is it a sort of culture of business is resulting in a way that AI is applied in a way that maybe could have more safeguards or could be made more safely? All of these factors are both technical and non-technical. And this is very important to consider when you're building that picture of AI risk, and that you're not just indexing for, this is where I am developing or deploying AI in my business. How are you thinking about your people, where you're getting the AI from, and your culture as a business? So another kind of risk management framework that's helpful once you've started to identify these risks, you can start to go through in cybersecurity what we call this feedback loop of risk management, where we have identified the risks. Now we're assessing them. We're doing something about them. So this is where it really comes into the indexing and thinking about where actually is AI being used or developed or deployed. Again, not everything is going to be relevant to everyone here. And then making sure that this is an ongoing cycle. There's another example of this on the next slide, actually, in a more applied setting. So NIST really recently released its AI risk management framework. And there they had 3 steps here, 4 steps actually. So the first one would be to measure and understand where risk comes in, to manage it, continue to map out how those mitigations are meeting that risk, and then creating a governance framework that will enable you to do that over time. So this is where that broader institutional view to AI governance comes in, is because once you have these processes, they can't just be something that happens once. It has to happen over time, and something that, leadership as a whole should probably and has to be bought into in order to make this effective. Because it is another element of risk management, like cybersecurity, like privacy, that's going to become increasingly important and needs to be tracked over time. Next slide, please. Here's another example of what that looks like. This one is actually Microsoft's model. So in the middle, you have our AI principles and how over time we've come to understand, again, where AI fits in our business. It's in a lot of our products. We're creating consumer-facing products. We need to constantly understand how those products are being used by consumers, whether they're safe. We need to develop models of that risk, and then we actually need to give our engineering teams resources to mitigate that risk. So this is what it looks like when you have that consumer-facing model. But you can imagine that this is because Microsoft is dealing with the entire AI lifecycle from start to finish. If you have, for example, if you're a supplier of data, you can assess where you are in the AI development pipeline, take pieces of these frameworks, and then apply them where it's most relevant. So some high-level objectives of a responsible AI strategy or AI governance strategy to help ground it and frame it in something more concrete. What is the ultimate goal of doing this in the first place? Is that we want to create responsible technology, number one. Number two, we want other people to use this technology in a way that's rights respecting. And then 3, we actually want the technology to benefit people. We want to create trust in AI. And AI governance actually creates a layer of trust in the technology that can help people apply it to solve problems. So it's a really it's a good positive feedback cycle that actually helps with AI adoption as well. So here are just a couple summary slide of AI risk management frameworks that are available. And the reason why I left this others one open is I hope that during the discussion, you all will share some others that you've seen. NIST is one of the most recent ones. IEEE has one as well. There are other existing standards that apply too. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about this. Here's an example of what I mean by when I say that existing technology standards already apply to AI, that we're not doing something entirely new here, that ethics in technology is not a new field. And so this is an example of how NIST has taken some categories of standards that it has had, for example, in the legal and regulatory domain or the analytical and research domain. And NIST has done the job of mapping to say why this is relevant to AI already, how you should apply them, and then actually the risk that these existing standards mitigate. So it's worth mentioning and noting that we don't need entirely new frameworks to start doing this today. And of course, to enable all this to happen in the first place, we need to give tools and resources at the engineering level. And here are just, again, a few examples of some that are available. There's the Microsoft Responsible AI Toolbox, Google's What If, IBM's AI Fairness, data sheets for data sets, and other standardization activity that are outlining and detailing how to build AI risk management tools and monitoring. And so, again, I'd love to come back to that in the discussion if you have any other resources that you felt helpful as you are developing AI systems. Here's another way to look at it, which I think tends to be really helpful, especially when you think about the end-to-end development of a product, or even if you're only involved in a certain segment of AI development. Which part of the AI lifecycle are you in? understanding which stakeholders are involved in that aspect of the cycle, and then asking questions relevant to the risk in that particular area. So we see that in this framework, this is an example that McKinsey made. We have data sourcing, model development, and monitoring and maintenance as actually pretty distinct phases that have different stakeholders involved and different levels of questions and management that are necessary to mitigate risk and where risk enters at each step of the way. So some final thoughts that I have on this subject are that we, in the name of the public interest, need more AI regulation, and it is coming. But because these are effects on society, we can't really rely on private sector sources to maintain public interest in that same way. So we really do need government to take action here in order to make sure that norms and ethical standards are applied consistently across technology companies and across society. And there are a couple hurdles that we have to that, some structural challenges into getting more AI regulation in place right now. One would be, a lot of expertise lies in the private sector. So it's great to have these kinds of dialogues to make sure, we're actually sharing information. Second one, we're still trying to decide on what the best way is. So we don't really have a normative consensus right now. And third, there is sort of a mismatch we are seeing between this, push for innovation and, push for regulation, and trying to reconcile those two things in a way that can advance innovation, but in a measured and thoughtful way. But all in all, laws and norms and standards are going to be absolutely critical for responsible AI, and industry is not going to be able to tackle this by itself. So final closing thoughts here. AI governance is going to be an entirely unique exercise to every organization. There are tools and frameworks that exist for both development and use of AI, and it's very important to consider where you are upstream or downstream in the AI lifecycle for employing these existing frameworks, because not all of them are going to be relevant, and it's going to be a learning journey. So it's really important that we we share our experiences in forums like this. And with that, that is the conclusion of this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this great presentation. And I believe we might have some questions in the Zoom chat. Let me check. And do we have any questions here? Anything to discuss with Rachel? Please let me know while I'll check the Zoom, okay?
So, first, great presentation, I think. One of the questions that I think a couple of people have struggled with in the policy space in particular is defining actions versus defining outcomes. Like, I wonder what your take is on that. Like, especially as when you said that for regulation is needed, whatever one may think of that, like, what that regulation is form of, whether it's outcome oriented or action oriented. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Got it. That's a really important question. So I think if I could, just to make sure that I summarize here, the maybe sometimes tension or prioritization of actions versus outcomes when we're thinking about risk management. So I think, especially because, so I'm thinking right now, thinking from the perspective of an organization that is producing many, many different kinds of technology that is coming into contact with many different kinds of AI models, it can be really difficult, honestly, to generalize action-oriented frameworks. I have definitely seen that myself. And so, but at the same time, sometimes outcomes are a little bit too far-fetched, or they're a little bit too abstract, because you can say, okay, I want this to happen, but then you really need to inform your people how. So I do think that it's a pretty effective approach to start with outcomes. Actually, in fact, I think that starting with something like a set of AI ethics principles is pretty in line with starting with an outcomes-oriented approach. What is the sort of level of beneficence that you're looking to achieve, or the good or the outcome that you're looking to achieve? And then from there, recognizing that we cannot be so prescriptive about the actions in many cases because the technology is constantly changing, even the way certain models are trained. For example, we have the different methods to train generative models. We can't simply say that AI training data needs to look a certain way when you're using a generative adversarial network versus a transformer. Those two things are not the same. You're not the same method. So the methods don't really apply. I do think it's important to start with outcomes. And I think that we can't etch in stone actions too quickly, but actions can be mapped pretty easily back into outcomes. And if we have that set of principles, we can ground ourselves.
Thank you. That makes sense. I guess if you look at, say, why Congress doesn't come up with the AI risk management framework, it grounds in the success of the cybersecurity arena.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why the cybersecurity arena was so successful is because of its wide adoption, where it was not telling actors what to do, but like what goals they should hope to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, like, if there are lessons you think, like, I guess, like, cybersecurity are not being pretty old, but they are updating it again. But I wonder if you think there are lessons that we need to take from when the cybersecurity RMF first came out, which was like 10 years ago, actually. And the technological change that has happened since then, maybe, do you think things need to move in a different, with a different, like, North Star, rather than thinking of, oh, because that was successful 10 years ago, maybe that goes towards.
I see the parallels between cybersecurity and AI. I don't see it as a one-to-one, actually. I see there's a subset of AI ethics issues that are security issues, that are cybersecurity issues. And so in that sense, we can kind of directly transfer some of the threat models and the experience that we have from cybersecurity over. But to your point, when we think about, cybersecurity and certain things, leaving it up to an organization what to do or not to do, in some sense, that depends on the threat model that you're using. You're thinking about, who is the adversary in that situation? When does that adversary come into play? There are adversaries in AI, but in AI, you also have fundamental rights. And I think that that's the difference. In cybersecurity, we have fundamental rights to an extent with privacy. But to me, the difference in that, we can't leave it entirely up to organizations is because we are actually dealing with human rights. And there are a pretty certain set of concrete, rights and decisions about people that need to be upheld legally and from a rights standpoint. So I think it's going to be a balance, and there are definitely lessons that we can draw from cybersecurity, like the fact that we need ongoing monitoring and evaluation. We can draw risk assessment from cybersecurity as well, but I do think that the threat model, so to speak, is a little bit different with AI.
Rachel, I think we have one more question in the Zoom chat. Can you see it?
Yeah, from Arash.
Yeah, could you possibly read it out loud and so that we all hear the question?
Got it. Yes. So there seems to be some alignment on the relevant responsible AI principles across industries such as fairness, transparency, accountability, et cetera. In that case, why do you think that the governance framework and process needs to be different across companies? And I think the main reason for that, from my point of view, and what I was thinking when I was framing this presentation, is that we have entities that are going to be procuring AI systems that have already been built. And then we're going to have entities that are involved at different points of the life cycle. And so an organization's governance process, if we're talking about, okay, I need to build a whole monitoring infrastructure to make sure my engineering teams are building AI in a way that's upholding our principles, that's a different exercise than essentially saying, okay, I need to procure an AI system, say for logistics. How do I do an ethics audit, quote unquote, of that system? to me, those are, two different framings and exercises. And I think that there's enough differentiation between development and use of AI and different points in the AI lifecycle that it's going to be highly organizationally dependent.
Thank you, Rachel, for such a great presentation, and thank you for answering the questions.